must feel like to be on the outside of one.
Mohamedou Ould Slahi, the Mauritanian held in Guantanamo. He recruited the guys who flew your friend's plane into the South Tower.
He put those men on my husband's plane?
I'm gonna make him pay.
Hello, welcome to our RecapPlus channel with me, Matthew. Today we will watch a recap movie called The Mauritanian, released in 2021. This is a spoiler content video. So please turn on the subtitle and let's start the story. Based on actual events, the movie is set in Mauritania in November 2001, shortly after the September 11th attacks. Mohamedou Ould Slahi arrives to visit his relatives directly from Germany. Everyone is very happy to see him, and they compliment him. One man even asks him to assist his science enthusiast nephew with a visa. Later, the ritual celebration continues, and some Americans approach Mohammed, wanting to meet him. Mohammed's cousin is wanted because of his association with bin Laden's group. Mohammed claims not to know anything, then changes his clothes and discreetly erases all contacts. His mother is worried that he might not return. The movie then shifts to Albuquerque, New Mexico, in 2005. Nancy Hollander attends a court hearing and requests case files from Terry Duncan, a young lawyer. She meets an acquaintance on the street who informs her that a Moorish lawyer approached him in Paris. He shares the story of Mohammed, taken away that fateful night and never returned home, keeping his relatives unaware for 3 years. By this time, it is revealed that he is allegedly one of the organizers of the 9/11 attacks. A man seeks information about the prisoner but is denied access. Nancy informs her colleagues that she wants to represent Mohammed in court because it is illegal to imprison a man without a trial. Terry agrees to be Nancy's assistant on the trip to Cuba. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Couch and two acquaintances discuss the terrorists involved in the 9/11 attacks, as the cases are now against them. Stuart's friend was in one of the towers, and he was given the Mohammed Slahi case. They tell him that this man recruited the person who directed the plane into the South Tower, where his friend was, and they want Stuart to press charges. Meanwhile, Nancy and Terry arrive at Guantanamo, where strict orders are in place. They are taken to Mohammed, and all records made at the prison are considered secret. Mohammed turns out to be a very amiable man who speaks English, surprising Nancy and Terry. Simultaneously, they surprise Mohammed because he is interrogated for 18 hours yearly, and he doesn't even know what he is accused of until the lawyers appear. Nancy asks him to sign a paper allowing them to defend him in court. He reluctantly agrees and asks to call his mother, but Nancy advises against it, as prison staff can listen to the calls. Meanwhile, Stuart Couch is shown all the information about Mohammed Slahi, whom Couch wants to sentence to death. The army cleverly exploits Stuart's loss, turning him into an angel of vengeance. Nancy decides they need to go to Virginia because Mohammed has written to them. She also informs Terry that her critical thinking is essential, and Mohammed may be guilty, but their goal is to spare him from being illegally held in prison. In Virginia, they are escorted to a heavily guarded room in the privacy office, where 2 envelopes containing Mohammed's letters are lying around. Since the government won't provide information about the case, they decide to find out for themselves. As they begin reading the papers, Slahi recalls August 5, 2002. He is shaved, handcuffed, injected with something, and photographed. The next day, they take him for interrogation, where people treat him nicely and question him about his past and his training with Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, Stuart meets his murdered friend's wife in church and promises to avenge him because he believes he is doing justice. During prayers, someone starts talking to Mohammed on the other side of the bars. He cannot know who it is because everything is covered with a thick green cloth. He is from Marseille, and Slahi is from Mauritania, so they decide to call each other Marcel and Mauritanian. The man from Marseille is identified by the number 241, and that is all that is known about him. The government refuses to provide any information about him, pretending he doesn't exist. Nancy goes to the man who handed her the case and asks to find out who the prisoner is. Stuart is told that Nancy Hollander has taken over the case. He is also informed of constant inconsistencies in the Slahi case records. They are not dated, but one signature is from an acquaintance of Stuart's. The lieutenant colonel goes to him to find out the details of the case but gets nothing. The Confidential Information Department has marked over important details from Slahi's letters. Mohammed's interrogation reveals that he was reported by an Al-Qaeda member who must have had names coerced out of him and had to throw it all off on someone. The interrogators revealed their cards. They were told that he was guilty of recruiting people for Al-Qaeda, and he would face dire consequences unless he proved otherwise. Mohammed speaks again with the 241 prisoner about what is going on and casually recalls how, In his school days, he won a scholarship to study in Germany. In 2005, the government approved access to classified information. Nancy received plenty of boxes of files, but almost all of them were concealed with a black marker, cutting off the possibility of finding anything at all. On the other hand, Stuart Couch receives the same thing but without the corrections. Technically, none of this is evidence, but Stuart is under pressure and has to hurry. Looking for new ways to win the case, Stuart visits his old comrade again and asks for access to the secret data, but the man sleepily refuses and says that he has to fly to Guantanamo himself and ask the general for access to the information. Nancy and Terry once again fly to Mohammed and recount everything his mother told them. At the same time, Terry accidentally reveals information about the privacy office reading his letters and determining the level of secrecy. This makes Mohammed terribly angry because he believes it is just between him and Nancy. However, Nancy convinces him to calm down and sue the government. At Guantanamo, Nancy meets Stuart, who invites her out for a beer and a complicated conversation begins. Stuart is very confident of winning and even tries to shame Nancy for defending this man. On the plane, Nancy says she needs to change her defense logic and find someone other than Mohammed. Stuart goes to see the conditions in which the prisoners are held and is very surprised. The temperature in the cells is 11 degrees. He asks the general why they are doing this but does not get a clear answer. Meanwhile, Mohammed learns English and tries to find some humanity in the guards, but in vain. Marcel is upset by a letter from his wife because it is only a letter, and he cannot see her. Mohammed writes about how he met his first love in Germany. When he saw on television what was happening in the world, he set out determinedly to defend his country, fighting on a side that included America. But the whole problem is that he trained with Al-Qaeda from 1990 to 1992. The investigators ask him why he deleted all his contacts from his phone when he was arrested. Mohammed explains that he didn't want trouble for his friends, but the investigators don't believe him. This begins to upset Mohammed, but he doesn't lose heart and reminds Marcel that they will definitely get out of there and get to their home. Nancy is asked why she is protecting a terrorist, and she explains that she is fighting for justice. One of Stuart's men asks for information, for which he is subsequently fired. Nancy reports that they can't find the man from Marseille with whom Mohammed was, so maybe he doesn't exist at all. Slahi asks the guard about his friend from Marseille and learns that he has been dead for a month. The guard says the man strangled himself. This news leaves the man in awe, and he prays for all the living and the dead. Nancy and Terry begin to be pursued by people with American flags, shouting at them outside the courthouse to remember the horrors of 9/11. The judge agrees with Nancy, and they receive the no longer classified information on the Mohammed Slahi case. Terry is shocked by the contents, for in the papers, Mohammed confesses to everything he has been accused of. Terry has sacrificed so much for this case, which turned out to be a failure, but Nancy has no intention of listening to her complaints. She says that Terry is free to leave and that she will keep working on the case. Nancy emphasizes that you can't win a case if you don't believe in yourself, and Terry leaves in tears. Meanwhile, Mohammed recalls how the people who interrogated him handed the case over to the military and warned them that they would not be ceremonious. The military came into the room and put a bag over his head. Nancy arrives at Slahi's house and talks about Terry dropping the case, mentioning Slahi's confession. Mohammed tells her that he was forced to do it. Nancy explains to him that this is what the letters are for, otherwise, how will she know the truth? All this angers Mohammed, for he has already completely lost faith in getting out of there. Nancy says one last thing: if he does not write letters, he will have to find another lawyer. Stuart meets his acquaintance Neil and accuses him of hiding information from the others, but he does not get a sensible answer. Mohammed recalls that it was Neil who tortured him and forced him to confess to the murder. He writes it all down in a letter. Mohammed is then transferred to another cell, where there is no Quran and no normal temperature. Nancy receives a new letter from Mohammed. At night, Neil comes into Stuart's office and tells him about what was going on in those days, showing him the secret memos. That night, Stuart and Nancy learn the truth about what was going on at Guantanamo Bay. Mohammed had been tortured by lack of sleep, loud music, forced water infusions to induce panic, beatings, sexual humiliation, and mockery of his infertility. The threat of his mother's arrest forced Mohammed to reveal all these abuses. He went mad right there in the cell where he was tortured. Stuart can't believe what's going on, and Nancy can't hold back her tears as she reads the letters. They tortured him for months, beating him constantly, and doing whatever they wanted to him. When he was no longer thinking or even able to speak, they said they had detained his mother and would put her in jail with him. Mohammed decided to confess to things he had not done, but they made him confess to other things as well, making a scapegoat out of him. Realizing the complexity of the situation, Stewart goes to church. Then he explains himself to the man who put him on the case, refusing to press charges. Stewart is called a traitor. Nancy arrives to support Mohammed and asks him to publish all the letters as a book. Stewart packs his things and leaves the place where he worked. Everyone calls him a traitor and writes about him in the newspapers. He goes to see Nancy, and after discussing the case, they decide to be on the same side. Stewart asks her to look in box number 32, which contains the polygraph results, and they were twice positive. Nancy makes a copy of them for Terry, who finally finds the prisoner and his family. Nancy puts Terry back to work. In 2009, a meeting began, where Slahi joined from the prison via video link and gave a moving speech about racism and about 8 years of difficult imprisonment. In 2010, he receives a letter from Guantanamo, stating that he has won the case, and joyfully goes home. But even though Slahi won the case, he continued to be in prison for another 7 years. He never saw his mother because she died in 2013. Nancy and Terry helped him fight until his release. After a long trial, Slahi published his book in 2015, which became a bestseller. He was released on October 17, 2016, after spending 14 years and 2 months in prison for nothing. He was never charged. He returned to Mauritania and married lawyer Kitty. They had a son, Ahmed, but he could not see his mother regularly from America because they had visa problems. Nancy Hollander is still struggling with injustice in this world. One of her clients is still being held in Guantanamo. Stuart Couch works for the Justice Department as an immigration judge. Terry Duncan continues to work as an attorney in death penalty cases. Neither service has apologized to Guantanamo prisoners for what happened. Of the 779 prisoners, only 5 have been prosecuted, and 3 have been ordered released by an appellate court.